By the spring of 1864, Robert E. Lee had established a reputation as one of the most effective field commanders in American military history. Commanding the Army of Northern Virginia since June 1862, he had repeatedly defeated or repelled larger Union forces in the Eastern Theater. His successes rested partly on tactical skill, bold maneuvers, rapid concentration of forces, and exploitation of terrain, but also on a consistent pattern in his opponent's behavior. Union generals in Virginia facing Lee's army after hard fighting typically withdrew across the Rappahannock or Rapidan rivers to regroup, resupply, and await reinforcements rather than press the campaign to destruction. This pattern began with George B. McClellan during the Peninsula Campaign of 1862. After the 7 days battles, from June 25 to July 1, McClellan's Army of the Potomac, though inflicting heavy casualties on Lee's forces, retreated to Harrison's Landing on the James River. McClellan cited exhaustion, supply difficulties, and Lee's aggressiveness as reasons for not renewing the offensive toward Richmond. Lee, despite losing nearly 20,000 men, retained the initiative and forced the Union Army to evacuate the peninsula by August. The pattern repeated at Second Manassas. John Pope's Army of Virginia was defeated decisively, but when combined Union forces under McClellan pursued Lee into Maryland, the campaign ended after Antietam, September 17, with Lee's withdrawal across the Potomac. McClellan, again cautious, did not follow aggressively, allowing Lee to recover in Virginia. Lincoln replaced McClellan shortly after. In December 1862, Ambrose Burnside attempted a direct assault at Fredericksburg. The Union suffered catastrophic losses, over 12,600 casualties to Lee's approximately 5,300, and withdrew across the Rappahannock without further action. Burnside's successor, Joseph Hooker, launched a more ambitious campaign in spring 1863. At Chancellorsville, Lee executed one of his most famous maneuvers, dividing his smaller army to strike Hooker's exposed flank with Stonewall Jackson's corps. Despite losing Jackson, mortally wounded by friendly fire, Lee forced Hooker to retreat north of the Rappahannock on May 6, even though Union numbers remained superior and Lee's army had suffered heavily. Around 13,000 casualties to Hooker's almost 17,000. These episodes shaped Lee's expectations. Union commanders, commanding larger armies and backed by industrial resources, tended to treat battles as discrete events. After setbacks or high costs, they retreated to safe bases. Fredericksburg, Falmouth, or across the Rapidan, reorganized and planned anew rather than accept sustained attrition. Lee, operating with fewer men and limited replacements, relied on this caution to offset numerical disadvantages. His strategy emphasized defensive terrain, rapid countermoves, and forcing the enemy to attack fortified positions or withdraw. In March 1864, President Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant, Lieutenant General and General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant's record in the West, Vicksburg and Chattanooga, in 1863, demonstrated persistence and a focus on enemy armies rather than cities or territory. Unlike predecessors, Grant viewed the war as a single, continuous effort. In his April 9, 1864, instructions to George G. Meade, commander of the Army of the Potomac, Grant wrote, "Lee's army will be your objective point. Wherever Lee goes, there you will go also." This marked a shift from prior Eastern campaigns, which often prioritized capturing Richmond. Grant's plan for 1864 involved coordinated offensives. The Army of the Potomac, nearly 120,000 men, would cross the Rapidan River below Lee's right flank, maneuver south, and force battle. Simultaneously, Benjamin F. Butler advanced up the James River toward Richmond, and Franz Sigel moved in the Shenandoah Valley to threaten Lee's supplies. Grant aimed to keep Lee reacting rather than initiating. Lee anticipated a spring offensive, but could not be certain of Grant's exact path. His cavalry under J.E.B. Stuart scouted Union movements, and Longstreet's First Corps remained distant near Gordonsville after winter operations in Tennessee. Lee's army numbered nearly 65,000 to 70,000 effectives, organized into three corps. 2nd, Richard S. Ewell, 3rd, A.P. Hill, and 1st, James Longstreet. On May 4, 1864, Union forces crossed the Rapidan at Germanna and Ely's Fords. Meade's army, 5th Corps, Governor K. Warren. 6th, John Sedgwick. 2nd, Winfield S. Hancock, advanced into the wilderness of Spotsylvania, a dense second-growth forest of scrub oak, pine, and underbrush that limited visibility and artillery use. Grant hoped to pass through quickly to open ground near Mine Run, where Union numbers and guns would prevail. Lee reacted swiftly. By May 5, Ewell's 2nd Corps engaged Warren's 5th along the Orange Turnpike, while Hill's 3rd moved parallel on the Orange Plank Road to strike Hancock's 2nd. Fighting erupted in thick woods. Coordination faltered on both sides. Initial clashes were inconclusive, but Lee committed to battle in the wilderness rather than falling back to stronger positions. The morning of May 6 brought renewed Union assaults. Hancock's corps, reinforced, drove Hill's exhausted divisions back along the Plank Road. Confederate lines wavered, stragglers streamed westward. Lee rode to the front near the Widow Tap Farm, attempting to rally troops personally. Accounts from participants describe him urging retreating South Carolinians to hold, asking if McGowan's brigade was running like a flock of geese. As pressure mounted, Lee prepared for contingency, possible withdrawal, but held position awaiting Longstreet. Longstreet's corps, marching overnight, arrived piecemeal around 6 a.m. Gregg's Texas Brigade led, counterattacking vigorously. Lee attempted to join the advance on his horse Traveler. Soldiers shouted, "Go back, General Lee," and seized the reins, refusing to move forward if he led. The Texans advanced without him, blunting the Union push. By midday, Longstreet organized a larger counterstroke. Using an unfinished railroad cut as cover, his men flanked the Union left, rolling up lines in a manner reminiscent of Jackson at Chancellorsville. Momentum built. Confederates pressed toward the Brock Road. Then, confusion in the smoke led to disaster. Confederate troops fired on their own reinforcements, wounding Longstreet severely in the throat and shoulder, May 6, and killing Brig General Micah Jenkins. Command shifted temporarily. The attack stalled. On the Confederate left, Ewell's corps faced Sedgwick's 6th. Late in the day, Brigadier General John B. Gordon proposed a flank attack, but received delayed approval from Jubal Early, division commander. When launched near dusk, Gordon's brigade captured artillery and around 600 prisoners, disrupting Union lines before darkness halted progress. Casualties mounted rapidly. Union losses for May 5 to 6 approached 17,000 to 18,000, and Confederate around 8,000. The woods caught fire from artillery sparks and small arms flashes, trapping wounded men. Cries echoed through the night as flames spread. Through May 6, no major Union withdrawal occurred. Grant's headquarters remained in place. Scouts reported no retrograde movement across the Rapidan. Lee received intelligence of Union trains shifting, but no clear retreat signs. Previous opponents, Hooker after Chancellorsville, for example, had pulled back under similar pressure, yet Grant's army stayed, entrenched, and prepared for further action. This set the conditions for May 7. Lee, assessing reports from scouts, prisoners, and staff, began to question the familiar pattern. The wilderness had been costly and chaotic, yet the Union commander showed no inclination to disengage northward. Instead, evidence suggested movement southeast, toward Spotsylvania Courthouse, a key crossroads controlling roads to Richmond. The fighting on May 6, 1864, intensified the chaos of the wilderness. After the morning repulse of A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps along the Orange Plank Road, James Longstreet's 1st Corps arrived to stabilize the Confederate right. Longstreet's divisions, led initially by the Texas Brigade under John Gregg, counterattacked vigorously around 6 a.m. near the Widow Tap Farm. Lee personally attempted to lead the Texans forward on his horse Traveler, but his men, recognizing the danger, seized the bridle and shouted for him to go back. This incident, recorded in multiple participant accounts including those of soldiers present, underscored Lee's willingness to expose himself while also highlighting the troops' determination to protect him. Longstreet then reorganized for a larger effort, drawing on reconnaissance that identified an unfinished railroad cut running parallel to the Plank Road. He positioned his brigades to exploit this natural avenue for a flanking maneuver. By late morning, the attack rolled up the Union left, pushing elements of Hancock's Second Corps back toward the Brock Road. The momentum suggested a potential decisive blow, similar to the Chancellorsville flanking success the previous year. However, in the thick smoke and underbrush, confusion arose among advancing Confederate units. Troops from Mahone's brigade mistook Longstreet's reinforcements for Union forces and opened fire. Longstreet was struck in the throat and shoulder by a Minié ball, severely wounded and removed from the field. Brigadier General Micah Jenkins, riding nearby, was killed instantly by the same volley. Command of the First Corps passed temporarily to Charles Field, and the attack lost cohesion just as it threatened to break through. On the Confederate left, along the Orange Turnpike, Richard S. Barrett, Ewell's Second Corps had held against John Sedgwick's Sixth Corps with limited action through much of the day. Late in the afternoon, John B. Gordon, commanding a brigade in Jubal Early's division, identified a vulnerability. The Union right flank north of the turnpike appeared uncovered, hanging in the air amid the woods. Gordon proposed an immediate flank attack to Early, who hesitated, citing concerns about exposing his own line and the lateness of the hour. Gordon persisted, and the proposal reached Lee around dusk. Lee approved the move without delay. Gordon's brigade advanced near sunset, striking Sedgwick's exposed flank, overrunning positions, capturing artillery pieces, and taking approximately 600 prisoners, including 2 brigade commanders. Darkness and disorganization among the attackers prevented further exploitation. The assault ended as night fell. The day's casualties were staggering. Union estimates for May 5–6 totaled around 17,666 killed, wounded, and missing, while Confederate losses stood at roughly 7,500 to 8,000. The dense forest, ignited by sparks from musketry and artillery, created secondary horrors. Fires spread rapidly, trapping wounded soldiers who could not move. Eyewitness accounts describe cries for help amid the flames, with some men burning alive as comrades attempted rescues under fire. Both armies paused major operations as night descended, though skirmishing continued sporadically. Throughout May 6, Grant maintained his position. His headquarters remained near the Lacey House, and no orders were issued for a general withdrawal across the Rapidan. Instead, Union engineers and staff prepared for continued operations. Cavalry reports and prisoner interrogations indicated no retrograde movement of the main Union body. This contrasted sharply with prior campaigns. At Chancellorsville in 1863, Hooker had retreated on May 6 after similar heavy fighting and losses, despite retaining numerical superiority. McClellan had pulled back after the 7 days in 1862 and Burnside after Fredericksburg. Lee's staff and subordinates, accustomed to these precedents, anticipated a similar Union response. Lee spent the night assessing the situation. He received updates from cavalry scouts under J.E.B. Stuart, including indications of Union wagon trains and infantry, shifting southeast rather than north. Prisoner statements and captured dispatches suggested Grant intended to maneuver toward Spotsylvania Courthouse, a crossroads village about 12 miles south that controlled key roads to Richmond, including the Fredericksburg Road and routes from the Wilderness. Spotsylvania offered Lee defensive advantages, higher ground, river lines, but reaching it first would require rapid marches. On the morning of May 7, with no Union assault forthcoming, Lee rode along his lines. He conferred briefly with subordinates, then joined Gordon near the left flank, where the previous evening's attack had occurred. Gordon later recounted the exchange in his Reminiscences of the Civil War, 1903, a primary source based on his direct involvement. Lee turned to him and stated quietly, "Grant is not going to retreat. He will move his army to Spotsylvania." Gordon asked if Lee had specific intelligence confirming such a shift. Lee replied, "Not at all, not at all. But that is the next point at which the armies will meet. Spotsylvania is now General Grant's best strategic point." This conversation, corroborated in Douglas Southall Freeman's R.E. Lee, Volume 3, Chapter 17, drawing on Gordon's memoir, official reports, and staff correspondence, marked the moment Lee articulated his conclusion. He based it on deduction rather than definitive proof, the absence of retreat signs, the pattern of Grant's movements, and the strategic logic of Spotsylvania as the logical next objective for a commander aiming to outflank Lee's position and threaten Richmond's rail communications. Lee immediately ordered repositioning. Richard H. Anderson, temporarily commanding Longstreet's First Corps after the wounding, received instructions to march toward Spotsylvania that night, using the most direct roads. A.P. Hill's and Ewell's Corps were to follow as conditions allowed. The Confederate Army began slipping away from the wilderness lines under cover of darkness, racing to occupy the crossroads before Grant could seize it. Meanwhile, Grant issued orders for his own advance. Around 6 a.m. on May 7, he directed Meade to move the Army of the Potomac southeast via the Brock Road and other routes toward Spotsylvania. This decision aligned with his April instructions to pursue Lee relentlessly. In the days that followed, Grant would famously write, "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer." Though not directly known to Lee at the time, it reflected the same determination Lee had intuited. The realization on May 7 was not born of panic or defeatism, but of careful observation. Lee recognized that Grant operated differently. He accepted heavy losses without disengaging, replenished from vast reserves, and kept continuous pressure. Previous Union generals had treated battles as isolated, retreating to preserve their armies for future campaigns. Grant viewed the campaign as a single attritional struggle against Lee's army itself. By midday May 7, both armies were in motion towards Spotsylvania. Confederate troops under Anderson reached the courthouse area first, entrenching hastily as Union vanguard units appeared. The race had begun, confirming Lee's assessment. The wilderness had been tactically inconclusive, neither side could claim clear victory. But strategically, Grant's refusal to retreat shifted the initiative. Lee's army, though inflicting greater proportional damage, now faced a foe unwilling to yield the field after setbacks. This moment highlighted the core difference. Lee's genius lay in defensive maneuver and exploitation of enemy caution. Grant's in relentless advance, accepting attrition because Union resources allowed recovery while Confederate ones did not. The conversation with Gordon encapsulated Lee's dawning understanding that the old pattern had broken. The conversation between Robert E. Lee and John B. Gordon on the morning of May 7, 1864, proved prescient. Lee's deduction that Ulysses S. Grant would not retreat but instead maneuver toward Spotsylvania Courthouse aligned precisely with Grant's orders issued that same morning. By midday, both armies were racing southeast along parallel roads through the thickets and clearings south of the wilderness battlefield. The Confederate vanguard under Richard H. Anderson reached Spotsylvania first, around noon on May 8. Anderson, temporarily commanding Longstreet's First Corps, began hasty entrenchments along a low ridge just north of the courthouse village. Within hours, Union cavalry under Philip Sheridan appeared, probing the position, but Anderson's infantry held the key crossroads. Grant's main columns followed. Governor K. Warren's Fifth Corps led the advance along the Brock Road, with Winfield S. Hancock's Second Corps close behind. By late afternoon, Warren's men encountered Anderson's entrenchments and launched probing attacks that were repulsed. Sedgwick's Sixth Corps arrived later, extending the Union line northward. Lee, riding ahead with the rest of his army, reinforced Anderson that evening. Ewell's Second Corps took position on the Confederate left, while A.P. Hill's exhausted Third Corps, reduced by heavy casualties and illness among its commander, arrived piecemeal. The lines quickly solidified into a rough arc facing northeast, with Spotsylvania Courthouse anchoring the Confederate center rear. The Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8 to 21, 1864, became one of the most prolonged and brutal engagements of the war. Fighting intensified on May 10 when Emory Upton, a young brigade commander in Sedgwick's corps, devised an innovative assault. His troops advanced in compact columns without halting to fire, overwhelming a salient in the Confederate line held by Doles's Georgia Brigade. Upton captured several hundred prisoners and guns, but lack of immediate support allowed Confederate reserves to counterattack and restore the position. The attack demonstrated the potential of concentrated, rapid infantry assaults against entrenchments, a tactic later refined, but it failed to break the line. On May 12, the heaviest action occurred at what became known as the Bloody Angle. Hancock's Second Corps launched a massive dawn assault against a pronounced salient in Ewell's line, held by Edward Johnson's division. Dense fog aided the surprise. Union troops overran the outer works, capturing Johnson himself and nearly 4,000 prisoners. The fighting devolved into nearly 20 hours of continuous hand-to-hand combat in pouring rain along a 200-yard stretch of trench. Men fought across the parapet with bayonets, club muskets and rocks, the dead piled so high that soldiers stood on bodies to continue firing. Official reports and survivor accounts describe a trench filled with water, blood, and corpses to the depth of several feet. Both sides fed reinforcements into the melee until exhaustion and darkness ended the struggle on May 13. Confederate losses at the Angle were severe, thousands killed or wounded, with entire regiments shattered, but the line held. Throughout the Spotsylvania phase, Grant continued to press. After the May 12 failure to exploit the breakthrough, he shifted tactics, ordering flanking maneuvers to the south and east. Lee responded by extending his entrenchments, creating what became the longest continuous field fortification of the war up to that point. Skirmishing and smaller actions persisted daily. On May 14-15, minor probes. On May 18, another unsuccessful Union assault near the Harris Farm. On May 19, Ewell's limited counterattack at the Harris Farm was repulsed with heavy Confederate loss. By May 21, Grant disengaged, slipping around Lee's right flank toward the North Anna River. Casualties at Spotsylvania were staggering. Union estimates totaled approximately 18,000 to 19,000. Killed, wounded, missing. Confederate around 9,000 to 12,000. Lee's army, already depleted from the Wilderness, lost irreplaceable officers and experienced troops, while Grant could draw replacements from the North's manpower pool. The pattern established in the Wilderness repeated. Grant suffered higher absolute losses, but accepted them as the cost of keeping pressure on Lee. At no point did he order a general retreat to the Rapidan or Rappahannock. Instead, he maneuvered continuously, forcing Lee to react defensively. This contrasted with every prior Union campaign in Virginia. McClellan, Hooker, Burnside, and Pope had all withdrawn after major engagements to regroup. Grant did not. At the North Anna River, May 23 to 26, Lee attempted to exploit Grant's advance by forming an inverted V defensive line along the riverbanks, hoping to induce Grant to attack divided segments. Grant probed the position, but declined to commit to a full assault, recognizing the trap. Instead, he again shifted southeast, crossing to the south bank and heading toward Hanovertown and Cold Harbor. The Battle of Cold Harbor, May 31 to June 12, marked the campaign's bloodiest single day. On June 3, Grant ordered a general frontal assault against strongly entrenched Confederate lines. Union troops advanced across open ground under devastating rifle and artillery fire. Thousands fell within the first 30 minutes. Estimates of Union casualties on June 3 alone range from 5,000 to 7,000, with total Cold Harbor losses around 12,000 to 13,000. Confederate casualties were far lower, perhaps 4,000 to 5,000. Grant later wrote in his personal memoirs, 1885, "I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made. No advantage whatever was gained to compensate for the heavy loss we sustained. Yet even this repulse did not prompt withdrawal. Grant held position, then on June 12 quietly disengaged, crossed the James River by pontoon bridge, and advanced on Petersburg, Lee's critical supply hub south of Richmond. The overland campaign proper ended with this maneuver. From May 4 to June 12, Union casualties totaled approximately 55,000, Confederate losses around 35,000. Proportionally, Lee lost a higher percentage of his smaller army, including key leaders. Longstreet wounded, Stuart killed at Yellow Tavern on May 11 during Sheridan's raid, and numerous brigade and regimental commanders. The Army of Northern Virginia never regained its earlier mobility or offensive power. Lee's realization on May 7 that Grant would not retreat proved correct and enduring. Through Spotsylvania, North Anna, and Cold Harbor, Grant maintained continuous contact and pressure, refusing to break off after setbacks. This approach stemmed from Grant's strategic view: destroy Lee's army in the field, not merely capture territory. As he wrote to Chief of Staff Henry Halleck on May 26, Lee's army is really whipped. I am now sending back all my surplus baggage and taking provisions with me for the balance of the campaign. Lee's army, though inflicting severe punishment, was gradually worn down, forced into entrenchments around Petersburg by mid-June. The moment with Gordon on May 7 crystallized the shift. Lee, relying on deduction from scouting reports, prisoner statements, and the absence of retreat indicators, understood that the familiar cycle of Union withdrawal had ended. Grant's persistence transformed the Eastern Theater from a series of separate battles into a continuous campaign of attrition. Lee's defensive skill prolonged the fight for 10 more months, but the overland campaign marked the beginning of the end. An army once able to dictate terms now reacted to an opponent who refused to yield the initiative. In the end, the realization was not about one battle, but a fundamental change in how the war would be waged. Grant's refusal to retreat after the Wilderness set the stage for every subsequent move, confirming Lee's intuition and reshaping the conflict's trajectory.